Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm going to be your pastry chef today, and you, well, you're my eager apprentice. We're going to step away from just staring at lists of ingredients and really zero in on the magic of technique. By the time we're done today, you'll see exactly how graduating from simple, pourable cake batters to thick, hands-on yeast doughs requires a totally different approach. So let's just dive right in.
Here is our syllabus for today. We're going to systematically build your skills across 3 distinct stages. First up, mastering simple liquid batters. Next, we'll explore the art of delicate inclusions. And finally, we'll tackle the hands-on techniques needed for firm pastry and bread doughs, creating structure through creaming and kneading.
Okay, Section 1, Mastering Simple Liquid Batters. Let's look at the absolute foundation of baking.
We have to start with the most basic technique of all, which we used for our plain cake recipe. Honestly, your only goal here is to simply stir the wet and dry ingredients together. That's your basic cake mixture: vanilla, egg, and milk. But here's the golden rule I constantly drill into my students. You have to stop stirring the exact moment it's blended. We do this to prevent gluten development. Minimal mixing is what keeps that crumb super tender and yields a beautifully smooth, pourable liquid. No fancy timing, just stir until everything becomes one.
Now contrast that with the yellow cake. This one requires a lot more discipline to avoid some really common mixing mistakes. You absolutely cannot just stir this and walk away. First, you combine the eggs, milk, and vanilla and add them to your dry mix. Then, you adjust your mixer to a low speed and beat gently for exactly 1 minute. Step 3. That is a chef's non-negotiable. You have to pause and scrape the bottom and sides of the bowl. This is absolutely crucial to make sure no dry pockets of unmixed flour are hiding at the bottom. Finally, beat again gently for 2 minutes. It's a highly precise sequence designed to give you a perfectly uniform liquid batter without overworking the gluten.
And you know, this perfectly illustrates why your mixing order is literally everything. Take the peanutty bars recipe. It lets you basically dump everything in at once. Cookie mixture, sugar, eggs, cocoa. Boom, mix it thoroughly. But a super common mistake with the spice cake is mixing your spices in way too early. You have to incorporate your liquid ingredients into the cake mix first, and only then do you add the cinnamon, allspice, and cloves. Think about it. If you dump dry spices in before the liquids are fully incorporated, they just won't distribute evenly. You'll end up biting into harsh clumps of raw spice instead of enjoying a beautifully balanced batter.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, the art of delicate inclusions. Let's talk about ingredients that need a much lighter touch.
So for our white cake, there's a really fascinating transformation that happens before the ingredient even hits the bowl. The recipe demands stiffly beaten egg whites. Now, unlike whole eggs, these stiff peaks are literally balloons of trapped air. This means we have to incorporate them incredibly gently into the basic cake mixture along with the milk and vanilla. We absolutely do not stir aggressively here. Our goal is to incorporate everything well without deflating all that precious trapped air that gives the white cake its signature fluffy lift.
We also have to completely adjust our technique for physical inclusions, like nuts. When making the topping for the pecan-glazed cake, step 2 is where the magic happens. After mixing the softened butter, flour, sugar, milk, and vanilla, we don't just stir in the nuts. We specifically fold the chopped pecans in. Folding is this gentle, sweeping under and over motion. We do it this way to ensure uniform distribution without crushing the pecans and without overworking that butter base before we spread it over the baked cake.
But you know what's funny? Sometimes delicate inclusions aren't mixed in at all. To completely avoid a heavy, muddy batter, the peanutty bars use this amazing layering sequence. Instead of trying to fold delicate coconut or heavy morsels into a thicker batter base, we actually interrupt the bake. We bake the base for 8 to 10 minutes, pull it out, and meticulously layer everything on top. Sprinkle the peanut butter morsels, slowly drizzle the condensed milk evenly, and finally spread those delicate coconut flakes. Then, right back into the oven. This ensures every single layer keeps its distinct texture.
So as a baker, your ultimate goal is adapting to your ingredients. We've tackled pourable batters, we've nailed delicate folding, but what happens when you're faced with a mixture that genuinely fights back? Well, that brings us to a major transition in our masterclass.
Section 3, Structure through creaming and kneading. Time to roll up our sleeves for the advanced stuff.
The absolute crucial starting point for structural pastries is right here in the toaster pastries recipe. Cream the shortening and sugar until airy. Guys, this is fundamentally different from gentle whisking. You are aggressively emulsifying solid fat, the shortening, with sugar. And for this to work, temperature is everything. The shortening must be at room temperature so it can properly trap air when you beat it at high speed. This friction creates microscopic air pockets. Creaming is absolutely essential for achieving that perfect, flaky, tender pastry texture. Only after this emulsion is airy do you slowly whisk in the whole eggs, followed by the flour and baking powder.
And the proof of why that creaming technique is so vital? It's all in the assembly. Because we creamed that shortening properly, we yield a wonderfully soft, smooth dough. A dough that can actually survive being chilled, flattened into an elongated rectangle, smeared with exactly 1 teaspoon of jam, topped with a second piece of dough, and aggressively crimped, all without tearing or crumbling in your hands.
15. That is the exact number of times you need to knead the Tender Biscuits dough on a floured surface. You start out simple, just stirring the Bisquick mix and liquid with a fork and letting it rest for 5 minutes. But to get actual biscuit structure, you've got to get your hands in there and knead it about 15 times. Why 15? Because this specific amount of physical manipulation develops just enough gluten to give the biscuits their flaky structure so they rise beautifully, but it stops before overdeveloping the gluten and turning them tough.
Let's look at an even starker contrast. Think about the thick consistency of Zwieback dough compared to our standard yellow cake. A yellow cake, like we saw earlier, is just a simple liquid batter. It's gently beaten and passively poured into a pan. But Zwieback teething biscuits? Totally different animal. This is a thick, yeast-based dough. It requires real temperature control, specifically lukewarm milk to activate the dry yeast without killing it, mixed with sugar, salt, star anise, eggs, and melted butter.
Unlike those quick batter cakes, this Zwieback dough requires so much more handling. You must add just enough flour to make the dough tangible. You literally have to feel it to know it's right. Then, it demands patience for the rise, followed by manually shaping it into 3-inch long rolls. It's a highly active, structural process from start to finish.
So, if we look at everything we've covered today, it all comes down to this. Your specific mixing methodology must perfectly match the textural goal of your final bake. A plain cake needs minimal whisking for a smooth, pourable liquid. A toaster pastry requires vigorously creaming the shortening for an airy, soft, workable dough. And a tender biscuit relies on kneading by hand to create a firm, structured dough.
So now that you understand the how and the why behind every single stir, fold, cream, and knead, I have a challenge for you. Look at your next recipe not just as a list of ingredients, but as a textural puzzle waiting to be solved. Are you going to test your precision with a spice cake, or are you going to get your hands floured up for some real kneading? The techniques are yours now. Go bake something absolutely incredible.